on First at 9 this Friday, the 25th of July 2025. From resilience to resurgence, worst of the economic crisis behind Sri Lanka. Foundation being laid for long-term sustainable growth, says IMF mission chief for Sri Lanka. IMF spokesperson, meanwhile, hails Sri Lanka's economic outlook as positive. Claims, however, that the economy is vulnerable to external shocks, particularly global trade policy. So Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka waives visa fees for tourists touching down from 47 nations, including the UK. The pursuit of justice. Prime Minister affirms the government's commitment to holding those responsible for the 2019 Easter Sunday attacks accountable. Opposition says top government ministers' involvement in probes prejudices investigations. Regional diplomacy. President Derana off to the Maldives on Monday, commemorating 60 years of diplomatic relations. Several key memoranda of understanding to be inked during the visit.
Men are the tools.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Derana First at 9. I'm Aditya Singh joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world, brought to you by the only Sri Lankan media network to rise to the pinnacle across all media platforms, recognized as the best by every survey and beloved by the people. Now in your top story tonight, the annual general meeting of Global Federation of Sri Lankan Business Councils, comprising Sri Lankan professionals and entrepreneurs from around the world, was held this morning in Colombo under the patronage of President Anura Kumara Dissanayake. Addressing the gathering, Minister Vijitha Herath announced plans to establish a dedicated coordination unit to streamline engagement between the government and the business sector. He called on entrepreneurs to unite and play a proactive role in revitalizing the national economy.
The annual general meeting of the Global Federation of Sri Lankan Business Councils, comprising Sri Lankan professionals and entrepreneurs based overseas, was held in Colombo this morning under the patronage of President Anura Dissanayake. The event brought together Sri Lankan business leaders, entrepreneurs based in 15 countries and several foreign ambassadors. As part of the proceedings, symbolic awards were presented to representatives of the International Council in recognition of their contributions and ongoing commitment to global collaboration.
The
economy is stabilizing at the moment. Sri Lanka is politically stable at the moment. Since we are bound by the IMF program, we are not able to grant tax breaks at the moment. However, unlike in the past, now you don't have to bribe ministers and officials to begin businesses. We will set up a coordination unit to ease coordination between businesses and the government. Meanwhile, through the BOI, we have approved investments worth $500 million within the past 6 months. Furthermore, we will set up 3 new investment zones in the north. At the moment, we have opened 3,000 acres of land vested with the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Board for projects. Within the past 6 months, we have been able to increase our export revenue. The US has in fact levied new tariffs upon our exports. The President today will hold a Zoom discussion with the US Trade Representative's office. Let's all unite in developing Sri Lanka's economy.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
Yadia, ලොව වැඩියෙන්ම අලෙවි වන ඉලෙක්ට්‍රික් ස්කූටරය Avance Auto විසින්.
Now, the International Monetary Fund's mission team, concluding its visit to Sri Lanka, urges the government to implement decisive revenue-enhancing measures as it prepares the 2026 budget. Meanwhile, joining an exclusive interview on Derana's at Hyde Park with Indiva Amawatha today, IMF mission chief for Sri Lanka, Evan Papageorgiou, says the worst of Sri Lanka's economic crisis is behind and that the country is laying the foundation for long-term growth. However, IMF spokesperson Julie Kozak warns that Sri Lanka's economy remains vulnerable to external shocks such as global trade policy, and highlighted that the IMF is in constant communication with the government regarding such developments.
The visiting International Monetary Fund mission team, led by Mission Chief for Sri Lanka, Evan Papageorgiou, concluded its 4-day visit to Colombo today. In an end-of-mission statement, the IMF team emphasized the need for decisive revenue-enhancing measures as Sri Lanka prepares its 2026 budget. This statement by Mission Chief Papageorgiou highlights that the Sri Lankan authorities' economic reform program is yielding commendable outcomes. However, the IMF emphasizes that maintaining macroeconomic stability requires sustained efforts to raise fiscal revenues. To continue meeting the medium-term primary balance objective of 2.3% of GDP, the IMF claims that the 2026 budget should be underpinned by strong revenue measures and appropriate spending allocations consistent with program parameters. Upcoming bills on public-private partnerships, state-owned enterprises, public procurement and public asset management should be consistent with the Public Financial Management Act and best practices. According to the IMF statement, cost recovery energy pricing should be maintained to minimize fiscal risks and support financial sustainability of the energy utilities. The IMF encourages a swift completion of bilateral debt restructuring agreements and acceleration of progress towards operationalizing the Public Debt Management Office. The statement goes on to say that monetary policy should remain prudent and prioritize price stability. A steadfast implementation of governance reforms outlined in the government's action plan is critical to addressing corruption vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, joining an exclusive interview on Ada Derana's at Hyde Park with Indivara Yamawatta today, IMF Mission Chief for Sri Lanka, Evan Papageorgiou, said the worst of the economic crisis is behind.
The IMF continues to emphasize on revenue mobilization through value-added tax and property taxes, and Sri Lanka still is grappling with high cost of living. How much fiscal space exists within the parameters of the EFF program for Sri Lanka to look at improving the living standards while bringing down cost of living that we've seen rise in Sri Lanka?
The crisis of cost of living is hopefully behind us. We think that inflation is on its way towards a sustainable path around the central bank's inflation target of around 5%. So in that regard, we think that the worst of the cost of living crisis as a general over an inflationary environment is hopefully squarely behind us. Protecting the poor and vulnerable is very important and should continue being a primary importance for the government and for all stakeholders.
Portion of the public remains skeptical of the IMF program and concerned about what the cost of these reforms are going to be and what we can realistically expect in the next 12 months to come.
Obviously, the country has been through a lot with an economic crisis and a humanitarian crisis, and we hope that this is squarely behind us and we have already seen all the conditions of this being satisfied. The first half of the program was about making macroeconomic adjustments and stabilizing the real economy. The second half of the program is the one that we think will put the foundation in for long-term sustainable growth. The reforms that are taking place right now, the upgrade on governance, on reduction of corruption, I believe the next 12 months will be better. There's always risks, but with implementation of these reforms, we hope to continue seeing growth being strong, inflation being on target, and both fiscal and external buffers continue being built that will benefit everyone.
You mentioned the second part is about long-term sustainable growth. Do you see Sri Lanka on track?
Yes, I do. I do. And I hope that the momentum will continue.
Meanwhile, in Washington, IMF spokesperson Julie Kozak said although Sri Lanka's outlook is positive, the economy is vulnerable to external shocks, particularly global trade policy.
Although the economic outlook remains positive for Sri Lanka, global trade policy and uncertainties do pose risks. And so as the team moves forward to the fifth review, which we expect will be held in the fall, they will, of course, be making an overall assessment of Sri Lanka's economy, including any implications from trade tensions or uncertainty. And of course, they will take that into account in discussions with the authorities on policies and all of the program matters as part of the fifth review.
Apico Next Gen. Make the leap to faster sleep.
හොඳම ෆෝන් එකක් ගන්න. ළඟම අපාන්ස් එකට යන්න.
Now on the same topic, the implementation letter on debt restructuring between France and Sri Lanka related to external debt restructuring was signed yesterday. The signing took place at the Ministry of Finance in Colombo between Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma, Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, on behalf of the government of Sri Lanka, and Yazid bin Said, Country Director of AFD, on behalf of the government of France, with similar agreements signed with BPI France, Assurance Exports and Banque de France. The milestone allows Sri Lanka to resume paused loan financing and secure new project funding from French agencies supporting national development efforts. Now in your updates out of Parliament, Prime Minister Dr. Harani Amarasuriya reaffirms the government's commitment to holding those responsible for the 2019 Easter Sunday attacks accountable. The Premier emphasizes that disciplinary actions and criminal charges will be based on the Attorney General's recommendations and that the investigations will proceed impartially. However, SJB parliamentarian Chaminda Vijayasiri questions the integrity of the investigation due to involvement of Deputy Minister of Defence Major General Aruna Jayasekara, who was the commander of the army in the Eastern Province during the attacks.
The incumbent government will not hesitate to take disciplinary action against all individuals deemed responsible for the Easter Sunday attacks. The Attorney General's recommendations submitted to us after due consideration of the Presidential Commission report will be relied upon in initiating disciplinary action. Furthermore, the government will also never hesitate to file charges against those deemed to be criminally responsible after the relevant CID investigations draw to a close. In doing so, we vow to enforce the law against all equally, notwithstanding the affiliations certain officials may have with the government.
Deputy Minister of Defence Major General Aruna Jayasekara, who once served as the commander of the Eastern Province, definitely knows what happened to Sarah Jasmine. Aruna Jayasekara is a deputy minister. We cannot accept this pledge made by the government because the relevant deputy minister continues to be part of the government.
We are not bothered by MP Vijayasiri's refusal to accept our pledge. We have initiated investigations. We are in the midst of taking all other relevant actions. At the end of the day, the successful completion of these probes will render justice to the victims of the Easter Sunday attacks.
According to Hadia's statement, Sarah Jasmine was at the scene of the bombing in Saindamardu. Sarah was later taken out of the scene. At first, a group of soldiers were deployed to the scene. It is impossible for the then commander of the Eastern Province, Major General Aruna Jayasekara, to have been unaware of the deployment of such troops. Even if he had been unaware of it at the outset, he must have known about the deployment later. Major General Aruna Jayasekara's subordinates now conduct investigations while he sits atop as the Deputy Minister of Defence. My question is simple. Today the Deputy Minister of Defence is Major General Aruna Jayasekara. Explain to us how the authorities will be able to conduct a fair investigation when the officials probing the matter are subordinates of the Deputy Minister of Defence.
Aruna Jayasekara was named the Deputy Minister of Defence in 2024. The Easter Sunday attacks transpired in 2019. Aruna Jayasekara was not the Deputy Minister of Defence from 2019 to 2022. Then the relevant authorities could have conducted the investigations as fairly as possible. However, that never happened. We are now completing a task that they were never able to finish off when they were in power. We will not console them over their grief regarding the matter. Investigations into the Easter Sunday attack will continue to move forward. There is nothing to hide. All pertinent facts will be presented and justice will be served.
Upon assuming power, the incumbent government has taken up a rigid stance on regulations surrounding privately held pharmacies. The National Medicines Regulatory Authority has denied several owners of pharmacies the opportunity to update their permits. Owners of pharmacies have raised concern over this matter. From the 1st of January this year till the 18th of July, a total of 2,039 applications were filed with the National Medicines Regulatory Authority seeking extensions for existing permits authorizing the operation of pharmacies. From among the applications filed, new permits were granted to 1,820 applicants. Therefore, 89.25% of the applicants have received new permits. I believe that you must represent the 90% who were granted permits and not the 10% who weren't. Who are these applicants to whom permission was denied? These are applicants who seek permits to operate pharmacies without pharmacists. That can never be allowed. I am disappointed by the opposition's plea requesting that permits be granted to these subpar pharmacies. Instead, the opposition must instruct these pharmacies to upgrade their standards.
As for the governor and the central bank, there is no sense of direct responsibility to whom it comes. Through the process, there is a necessity of institution of this nature. Today, if you want to buy a car, if you want to buy a house, if it's investments overseas, priority sector lending on the basis of government salary outward is approved by central bank, but his own salaries is approved by himself. So the SMEs have been squeezed against the wall. So these type of things, the control is not in the hands of an elected finance minister like Anura Disanayake, who is elected by the people. An unelected person is running the fiscal and the monetary and decide the fate of the economy of this country. This country's economy economy has gone through too much of turbulent time, and it's necessary that we have the sense of accountability reporting directly. Please, you all have got 2/3, you all have got the necessary things. If there have been half-baked legislation that have come in, it's time to get it corrected. I'm saying with empirical evidence and with practical experience. This country can't go through another 22nd May type of operation. If the sense of independence is there of a central bank, what is he doing in Washington when you got to do Donald Trump's tariff negotiations? These are the sense of independence that is breached, Honourable Minister. So I would appreciate, with your knowledge, to take this on and ensure this corrective action is done with immediate effect.
As of now, the central bank operates and functions within this given framework and autonomy, not only for administrative purposes but also for the accountability purposes as well. They have to go by information, facts, figures and research and not by emotions or any other saying. So therefore they are accountable and they have to report. The reporting really matters in 3 types of reports. If there are any deviation, of course we can question and take them accountable and raise questions and ask. Specifically this inflation target, it is very clear that the 5%, if you take last 20-year period, because they have taken the information into account. So our average inflation lies 5%. Of course, due to the crisis period, it has gone up to 70%. That is a different story. That is the reason why now it has come down and we are experiencing a kind of deflationary situation. Now it has gradually moved up to 0. So therefore 5% has been decided based on facts. In the future, if it is not appropriate, we can accordingly change. As of now, so they are working according to that. And one thing I must tell you, as far as their autonomy and accountability and practices are concerned, in fact, price and financial stability has been achieved. Now we have to work on that to take the country forward for economic growth and development.
Now, Sri Lanka is taking a bold step to boost its tourism industry by waiving visa fees for travellers from 47 countries, including the UK. While this move may cost the Treasury around $66 million annually, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Employment and Tourism, Vijitha Herath, states that officials expect a major boost to tourism revenue. He stated this at the Hotel Show Colombo 2025 exhibition today at the Bandaranaike International Conference Hall in Colombo.
The Hotel Show Colombo 2025 exhibition was inaugurated today at the Bandaranaike Memorial International Conference Hall under the patronage of President Anurakumara Dissanayake.
During the past few weeks, we allowed tourists of 7 nations to visit Sri Lanka without a visa charge. The United Kingdom was among those nations. In the most recent cabinet meeting, we took a decision to waive visa fees levied against tourists of 40 other nations. Once the relevant gazette notification is issued, tourists of a total of 47 nations will be able to visit the country visa-free. Consequently, the Treasury is expected to lose $66 million in revenue per year. Even though Sri Lanka will lose out on that direct income, we expect to generate a much larger sum of money indirectly through the ensuing development of the country's tourism sector. Therefore, thrust upon the chest of all stakeholders of the tourism industry is the responsibility to develop the sector further. The Minister of Tourism will draft the required policies and will also regulate the industry. You, the stakeholders, however, will have to develop the industry. In light of tragedies such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the Easter Sunday attacks, we curtailed the issuance of visas to several countries. The Maldives was one such country. Accepting our invitation extended officially by the Maldivian President, President Dissanayake and I will take off to the Maldives next Monday. During our visit, we intend to discuss avenues through which we can broaden your access to the tourism market in the Maldives. Since you have ample experience in providing logistical support for Sri Lankan hotels, we believe you could capitalize on lucrative opportunities in the Maldives too. We will meet all relevant investors, entrepreneurs and stakeholders to that end. Furthermore, to bolster health tourism, from August 1st, we will commence the issue of 1-year visas to Maldivian tourists who will visit Sri Lanka. Now, President Anura Dissanayake issued directives to facilitate the immediate assignment of 5,000 members of the civil security force to several governing bodies, including the Department of Wildlife Conservation as well as the Ministry of Environment, in order to address prevailing shortage of shortage of officials concerning the mitigation of the human-elephant conflict. A discussion between President Anura Dissanayake and officials from the relevant authoritative bodies was held at the Presidential Secretariat yesterday. During the meeting, President Dissanayake directed officials to conduct in-depth assessments at the village level and noted that effective solutions need to be provided with support of both political leadership and the public. Meanwhile, immediate steps are to be taken to procure cabs and motorcycles as per directives issued by President Lanka to increase the number of vehicles allocated for officers of the Department of Wildlife. In addition, President Lanka called for the prompt preparation of submission of necessary plans for the proposed 800 kilometers of electric fencing and the restoration of 16 elephant corridors aimed at preventing wild elephants from encroaching into villages. Welcome back. Now in your business news, a Japanese delegation met with Secretary to the President Dr. Nandika Sanatkumar Naike yesterday at the Presidential Secretariat to discuss expanding Japanese investment in Sri Lanka. The group, including officials from Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry and business sector representatives, aims to explore new opportunities in both public and private sectors. Key attendees included Senior Additional Secretary Roshan Gamage, Japanese Trade Policy Bureau Director Toshiyuki Shimano, and officials from the Japanese Embassy. Further discussions are planned in the coming days. Now in other business news, the Colombo Stock Exchange continued its momentum in positive territory today as a result of price gains in counters such as Central Finance Company, City Holdings and DFCC Bank. The all-share price index gained 0.46% to close at 19,467.71, while the more liquid S&P Sri Lanka 20 gained 0.48% to close at 5,755.04. Market turnover crossed 4.2 billion rupees. Foreign participation in market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreigners closing as net buyers purchasing shares worth 137 million rupees. Now let's take a look at the day's foreign exchange rates. Welcome back. Now in your world news, Thailand and Cambodia exchanged heavy artillery fire for a second day today as their worst fighting in over a decade intensified and spread to new areas despite international calls for a ceasefire. At least 16 people have been killed and tens of thousands displaced in the escalating border battle. Meanwhile, Thailand has declared martial law in 8 of its districts bordering Cambodia.
Heavy artillery fire between Thailand and Cambodia continued for a second day today, marking the worst border conflict between the two nations in over a decade. At least 16 people have been killed and tens of thousands have been displaced as fighting spread to 12 locations, up to 6 the day before. Both countries blamed each other for sparking the violence. Thailand accused Cambodia of launching attacks on multiple fronts and deliberately targeting civilians, including schools and hospitals. Acting Thai Prime Minister Putham Vechachai warned the situation was intensifying and could escalate into full-scale war. The Thai military claimed Cambodia used heavy artillery and Russian-made BM-21 rocket systems in what is called barbaric and appalling attacks. It also accused Cambodia of war crimes, placing responsibility on former Cambodian leader Hun Sen, father of current Prime Minister Hun Manet. Meanwhile, Cambodia alleged that Thailand was deploying controversial cluster munitions despite widespread international condemnation of their use. International calls for a ceasefire have so far failed to halt the escalating violence.
Now, French President Emmanuel Macron announced France will formally recognize a Palestinian state in September at the United Nations General Assembly, aiming to revive hopes for peace in the Middle East. He shared the decision in a letter to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and on social media, urging other nations to follow. The move sparked strong criticism from Israel and the US. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu accused Macron of rewarding terror, while US Secretary of State Marco Rubio called it a reckless decision that fuels Hamas propaganda. France will become the first major Western nation to take this step, despite intense pressure from allies. Now, at least 7 students died and at least 26 others were injured after a portion of a government school building collapsed in Jahalwar district, India this morning. 2 of the children are reportedly in critical condition. The incident occurred around 8:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time at the government upper primary school while students were gathering for their morning prayer. At least 17 students were present inside the building when a section of classrooms from classes 6 to 7 gave way. A rescue operation was immediately launched after the collapse and all students trapped under the debris were pulled out and hospitalized. An investigation has been initiated into the incident and local authorities are also examining the structural stability of other buildings within the school. That's all the news we have for you tonight. Thank you. Have a great night.